Hello, I'm Nicky and I'm the head of the silver jewellery and watch sales that happen at Dawsons every month. And I wanted to bring my colleague along, Knott, to talk about this wonderful collection of silver that we have in our sale coming up on the 21st of July. Jenny is one of our silver and jewellery specialists, and she's had the great pleasure of cataloguing this collection. And we brought her a few pieces along so that we can have a chat about them.
Well, it really has been a pleasure. It's an amazing collection, and like many collections, you can see that it started with some what you might call ordinary or run-of-the-mill type boxes and vinaigrettes, and then obviously as the collection progressed, there are some really rare and unusual pieces, and I've absolutely loved cataloguing. It's been brilliant. And the first thing I thought we perhaps ought to explain is what a vinaigrette is.
Yeah.
So a vinaigrette, it's a small box, and you'll see there's we call it a grill, but it's a pierced grill inside. So if you imagine back 100 years or more ago or more, the streets weren't a desperately fragrant place for you to take your perambulations. Sanitary situation was not as it now is. So if you were someone of means or delicate sensibilities, you might have a vinaigrette. And underneath the grill, which you can see Nicky showing you, there would be a sponge. So that's now long gone, literally a sponge that you might find on the seabed. And that would have been soaked in aromatic substances, including vinegar, hence vinaigrette, but other oils to make it smell fragrant. So when you passed things in the street that weren't quite to your nasal liking, you could open your vinaigrette, have a small waft of the vinaigrette, and that would mean that the nasty odorous substances were cast from your mind. So that's the history of vinaigrette. It's also why you often see a little suspensory loop on the vinaigrette, because for a lady it might be attached to a muff chain and it would be hidden literally in her muff, so she could just pull it out and, as I say, sniff something slightly more fragrant than the odours that she might be passing as she walked along.
So tell me about this one. We've got a castle top.
Well, the castle tops are the kind of big daddies of the vinaigrette world. I'm sure that's not how the academics would put it, but the castle tops are the type of vinaigrettes that are really sought after. So you essentially started with a box that served a practical purpose, and then, as so often happens, they became decorative. It was an excuse to make something pretty, and the ones that fetch the most money are the ones that are decorated. We call them castle tops. They're designs in relief on the top of the vinaigrette. And in this collection, we've got a number of castle tops, including, I thought, 4 of Windsor Castle. That was a very popular subject for castle top vinaigrettes and snuff boxes. We've got one of Newstead Abbey. We've got one of Kenilworth Castle. There are a few castles and abbeys that were particularly popular subjects, and very often you'll find that these vinaigrettes were made by someone called Nathaniel Mills. He was particularly known for making vinaigrettes in small pieces, and I'm going to have a slight diversion here because I hope it's of interest, but you'll all know that British silver indeed, has hallmarks. And most vinaigrettes, not all, but most vinaigrettes have a Birmingham hallmark. And Birmingham is particularly known for the production of small items. So if you ever come across a silver thimble or any small piece of silver, you will more often than not find it's got a Birmingham hallmark. And Nathaniel Mills, who was a prolific maker, was manufactured out of Birmingham.
Okay, that's wonderful. And what about this box?
Well, that again is another castle top. I brought that along because that's a snuff box. And what we might say about that as you open up, and it was the same with the vinaigrette. You'll notice that the interior is gilded, and the reason they're gilded is because the gold wash was less vulnerable to corroding than just a silver interior, which could have worn away and is just much more vulnerable. So you'll see that in salts. Salt corrodes silver, very much so, but doesn't corrode the gilded interior. So that's why you'll often see salts have blue glass liners or gilding. And so the substances that the sponge was soaked in the vinaigrette and also the snuff itself didn't get to the silver and therefore didn't corrode it. And that I just picked out. It's another castle top, but you'll notice that the sides are highly decorated. And it's just, again, a nice is a bit of a bland word, isn't it? It's an interesting and really desirable object.
They're just really such pretty pieces. And what I love is this one, the cow.
Oh, the cow is great. And you're right to say they're pretty pieces, because actually this sort of thing lends itself to a collection. You don't need a vast space to accommodate it. They're pretty things that can give you enjoyment. I dare say we won't be using for them for their original purposes. But like you, I love the cow. So I have called in my catalogue description, I sort of spent a while thinking about how we would describe the cow, but I called him recumbent and in repose. Anyway, he's probably, in actual fact, he's probably just chewing the cud and getting on with his day. But anyway, that is wonderful because it looks like a cast model of a cow, and you turn it upside down, flat hinged cover, and then that beautiful grille. And the grills were normally engraved, they were pierced, they were engraved. Certainly the later ones, the earlier ones, actually the piercing was much plainer. And occasionally, for example, we've got a Scottish example and the grille is pierced with Scottish motifs of thistles. So occasionally the motif on the grille will be something special. It might be musical, it might be something to do with writing, but mostly they're sort of foliate and scroll engraved, as indeed that one is. But that, I think we both love that because it looks like just a lovely, fun little model of a cow, and actually underneath it's keeping it secret.
It is. It's just one of those things that you could display in a tabletop cabinet, and I think it will always make you smile.
I think it really would. And this actually made me smile enormously when I came across it as I unwrapped the collection. Because
now you're going to have to open it for me, Jenny.
Because this hunting horn, as it is not only a hunting horn, not hunting horn shape. It's not only a vinaigrette, it's also a scent bottle. So you open at the sort of trumpet end, and there's the vinaigrette, and then at the other end you've got a screw-off cover, and that's where you could put your scent. And actually, Nicky, that one shows very well with the chains there. So that would probably not have been on a muff chain, but that would have been an element to a chatelaine. And a chatelaine was a sort of piece of kit, really, that was held, that a housekeeper had, which had many chains, usually 5 or 7, hanging off it. It hung over your belt, and those 5 or 7 chains might suspend, in this case, the vinaigrette. It might have a thimble. It could have a little aide-memoire, all sorts of useful things that a housekeeper or a lady might need going about her daily practices.
There is a chatelaine from this collection.
There is a chatelaine from this collection. Indeed, there is, and which is absolutely wonderful. The chatelaine in this collection is actually continental, but it has all of the chains have accoutrements on them. Quite often, as you'd understand, over the years, things have got lost or disappeared. But this chatelaine, although the thimble and the other things suspended from it are English, and the chatelaine itself is continental, it's intact, and that's a really great thing to see. And I just think that's the engraving on that is lovely. And finally, this is by a company called Sampson Mordaunt, which is in fact a London maker, but Nicky will know this very well. They are particularly well known going into the latter part of the 19th and early 20th century. They're particularly well known for making pens and pencils, and actually things for gentlemen as well as ladies.
Yeah, absolutely. So, tell us about this, Jenny.
Well, I picked the caddy spoon. I think I'm right in saying this is the only caddy spoon in the collection.
Yes.
I picked it out because what it is you might get the name by caddy. It's for tea. It would go in a tea caddy. But what I think is particularly interesting is that tea was an expensive commodity. A highly expensive commodity. So you'll often find tea caddies either in wood or in silver, from the late sort of 1700s onwards. And it was such a prized commodity and so rare that it was deemed to be appropriate to house it in something equally rare. So you didn't just bung your tea in a jar. And consequently, when you spooned out, as it would have been then, your loose leaf tea, and no tea bags back in the day, when you spooned out your loose leaf tea, you also did it with something that was precious, and hence the tea caddy spoon. And again, they we've both seen many mutations of tea caddy spoons. Some of them are just plain, but they're normally engraved, and you get fun ones in the shape of a jockey's cap and all sorts of other things like that. And I liked that one because it's quite a fancy leaf engraved. In fact, that's particularly interesting because the bowl of the spoon is actually repoussé, so it's sort of pushed out from behind, but the handle is actually a hollow handle, chased on one side. So it's a little bit different, that one, and I just thought it was a fun example of a caddy spoon.
Often the same makers that would make the vinaigrettes would make the caddy spoons, and you get a lot of collectors of caddy spoons just as you do of vinaigrettes. And it's one of those things that sort of crosses over the disciplines. But what I really love about the history of tea drinking is that a little bit of knowledge can take you a very, very long way because of the size of the tea caddies. That when it was really expensive, they were really, really small. And as it became more commonplace, they start to get bigger. So the earlier ones often have lock and key to stop the housekeepers stealing the tea. And then by the time you get to the 19th century and into the Victorian era, everything to do with tea becomes bigger, from the tea caddy to the teacups, etc. So that just that little bit of social history can actually take you quite a long way.
And I know, well, you and I both love the social history, and that is a slightly later caddy spoon, which absolutely exemplifies what you've just said, because the earlier Georgian ones would tend to be smaller spoons, and also tend to be plainer. But you're absolutely right. And the idea of having your tea under lock and key, which was really really often the case.
It was indeed. And then what do we have?
Oh, well, we've got our little marsupial, who actually isn't from Australia, and he's not a vinaigrette, or she maybe, who knows. Can't see if there's a pouch there, but a pepperette or a pepper. And I have no doubt whatsoever that whoever finally acquires that will not be using it for pepper, but it's just such a lovely example. And novelty peppers make a lot of money. Owls are a particularly prevalent motif, as are the hares, all sorts of animals.
What sort of date would this have been?
That's going to be mid to late Victorian.
Okay, well, if you think about it, who was actually travelling to Australia at that time? Very, very small amount of people would have actually seen kangaroos. And yes, these pieces would be really, really rare.
They were rare. And in fact, when I was researching that, I wanted to find out if any other similar examples had come up for sale. And the only one that I could find recently to come up for sale was at an Australian auction house. And it was they are English examples. So I thought it was interesting that the Australians are very keen to have that as be part of their heritage as well.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm actually a Kiwi, believe it or not, and we're absolutely obsessed with our heritage and anything to do with sort of the early settlers and the Maoris. So yes, I can understand why that's such an iconic thing for an Australian collector.
And you and I know, who have taken auctions, when we take auctions instead of online auctions, and you can see where the bids are coming in from all over the world, and it's always quite exciting. Well, sometimes when we have gents and jewellery, you'll see there'll be suddenly a spate of bidding from Denmark, and I always think it's quite nice that there's a desire to repatriate things, or an interesting things that have come from or associated with your country. So I mean, it's been such a delight to catalogue this collection, and Nicky will probably put me right, but must be over 100 pieces in the collection.
I think
should
so,
think,
yes.
yeah,
By
it's
the
a
time you actually
really,
put it all together,
yeah,
yes.
it's been a really, really wonderful opportunity, and you know, and they are all here to sell.
Yes, they are indeed. And it means that the items can go and live another life in someone else's collection and be really appreciated. And that's part of the joy of collecting. Thank you very much for listening to us. Jenny is always in our Hampstead office for valuations on Fridays, as well as helping me here in Maidenhead. And I do hope you have a look at our catalogue online. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicky.